Hey folks, Darren with Fervent Astronomy, still in a green shirt with a review of the Sigma 105mm F2.8 DG DN macro lens. And in this case for Sony E mount, but I believe also probably available for Leica L mount. Or I guess it's not Leica L mount, it's just L mount. In this case, this is actually a pretty good macro lens, but is it a good astrophotography lens? Well, as far as ergonomics go, it's actually fairly compact. It's well built. The manual focus ring here, which is giant, is actually quite smooth. Here we can see that the lens is made out of a combination of materials. We've got lots of metal. There's some composites involved. Here we actually have a manual aperture ring, which has a locking function. So you can lock the aperture ring in either the manual or auto mode and keep from accidentally flipping into either one. The A mode auto, whatever it's called, is where you control the aperture through the camera, through your dials. Here we've got an AF/MF switch, customizable button, focus limiter, which for us you'd want to have on infinity, and a D-click switch for the aperture if you happen to be using it for video or something like that. Overall, macro lenses tend to have fairly flat fields, so I'm interested to see how this performs on the sky. We've got a fairly nice cylindrical shaped hood here, and we've got a 62mm filter thread covering the front element here, which is almost edge to edge, so you're getting a pretty wide front element there. You can use, of course, 62mm filters on here if you're doing an application that requires that. Overall, I've enjoyed this lens personally since I first purchased it, but does it perform for astrophotography? Well, we're going to find out together, because I'm going to be honest, I haven't really looked too closely at the samples that I've taken. So let's head over to Lightroom and take a peek. Hey folks, welcome to Lightroom. Here we've got 4 samples taken with the Sigma 105mm f2.8 macro for or DG DN for, in this case, Sony E mount. Now, this lens, I've taken samples using the Sony a7R Mark V, so it's about a 60 megapixel sensor, and we've got 4 samples here from f2.8 to f4. These are 60-second tracked exposures. So all of these are 60-second exposures, and they're tracked with the Fornax Mounts LighTrack II. For those of you who aren't aware, Fervent Astronomy is Fornax's North American distributor. So if you're interested in a robust tracker, star tracker, head over to ferventastronomy.com and maybe we might have what you need. But in this case, yeah, we're at 60 seconds, so that gives us a decent exposure, and we're at ISO 320. ISO 320 for the a7R Mark V is this camera's second base ISO. It's a 2-stage amplifier in this sensor, which means there's one analog amplifier at ISO 100 and one at ISO 320. That also means that every other ISO is digitally amplified, which is about the same thing as a camera just hitting the exposure button a couple of times. So what I like to do is I like to shoot at whatever the optimal ISO is for the camera. For a dual ISO camera like this one, I'll shoot at ISO 320, because whether it's 320 or 3200, I'm gonna get the same noise when I keep the exposure at the same value for f-stop and exposure time, and I'm gonna get basically the same file, with the exception of maybe when I'm doing it like this, preserving some of the highlights. So if there's any stars that would have been blown out at, say, 3200, this shooting lower actually might preserve some information, so I might be able to retain some star colors or something like that. Here, these are not taken too long ago, and we're just gonna pop right in here. So first things first, you can see there's wide open f2.8, a little bit of vignetting here around the edges. Not a ton though, it's not too bad. I have boosted the exposure here a couple of stops, I believe, in anticipation. But overall, it's not too bad. It's not the worst I've seen for sure, and especially with a telephoto lens like this, 105mm, you would expect to not have, serious vignetting. One of the things that we do have to watch out for is distortion and field curvature. Distortion is where straight lines would appear curved, and that's something that can be fixed in post here with a distortion correction. Field curvature, on the other hand, is something different. Since the lens is made up of a series of rounded, not spherical, mind you, usually, but curved lens elements, either plastic or glass or crystal, what have you, what we can get is spots where what we can get is a manifestation of focus being at different points depending on where you are across the lens. So let's say you might have perfect crisp focus in the center of the frame, but the edges and corners might be really out of focus. Or you might even have a sort of ring around the center of the lens that is out of focus a little bit more than the center, but then it gets into focus in the corners a little bit again. So that's something to watch out for. It's not something that I would keep myself up at night, but that's one of the things we'll be looking for. For now, let's pop into the center. And here, these are little star shapes. You got a 6-pointed star. This is interesting because we are wide open on this lens. So this is telling us we're getting some diffraction spikes here. That's something I haven't actually seen before, at least not in recent memory. So what I'm assuming is happening is this f2.8 aperture might actually involve being stopped down a little bit, although with 6 tines, that would imply 3 blades, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But we'll make note of it. It is kind of cute, very star-shaped, but, and again, we are dead center in the middle of the frame here. So these stars look pretty round, all things considered, minus, the tines on the bright ones here. So they're pretty well focused as well. They don't appear to be out of focus, and not a ton of aberrations. Now, one thing that we aren't seeing is spherical aberrations, where bright stars will get this kind of, I don't know how you'd want to put it, maybe like a fuzzy ball around them or halo. That's not really happening, and there's not a lot of chromatic aberration either around these bright stars where things are getting, let's see, is this a better example? Here is like maybe a little bit, we get a little bit of a color fringe. It can manifest sometimes as a complete fringe of one color, or you might have one color towards the center of the frame and one color more towards the edge of the frame, but overall, not too bad. Pretty happy so far. And here, if we go look in the mid zone here, this is where we might expect to start seeing some more optical aberrations, such as astigmatism, or if the lens had chromatic aberration. And there is a difference, and for a lot of you, you might be familiar with the term coma or chromatic aberration, and you might interpret any change in star shape as being chromatic aberration. And I'm here to tell you, actually, there's 3 sets of aberrations that are kind of getting all lumped under that term somewhat incorrectly. So chromatic aberration is when you have a star, such as this, and it turns into a bit of a wedge shape, and you get a fuzzy comet tail. And if that fuzzy comet tail points towards the edge of the frame, that's external coma. If the fuzzy comet tail points towards the inside of the frame, that is internal coma. And in this case, I'm not really seeing any. You might be noticing that there is almost a little bit of a triangular shape happening here, and you might say, well, it's coma, isn't it? No, coma is the fuzzy tail. But what you are seeing there, and hopefully we'll demonstrate it a little bit stronger up here, well, hopefully not actually, but what you are experiencing with this pointed triangular shape is astigmatism. Now, astigmatism comes in 2 flavors. You've got tangential astigmatism, which goes from the edge of the frame to the center, and it will have a radius kind of radiating either towards the center or out from the center, however you want to think about it. And then you have sagittal astigmatism. So if you're looking at the Navigator right now, sagittal astigmatism will ring the frame. So it's at a right angle to the tangential. So it will never point, to the middle. It always kind of forms often it manifests as little wings on the stars. Here, I'm really pleased to see that this isn't really the case. Here we've got a bit of tangential astigmatism, like a smidge. We're getting a little bit of elongation, but we don't have a ton of sagittal. It's possible the little points at the back here, those lateral points are kind of the worst tangential astigmatism we're getting. Let's go search around a little bit more. Yeah, maybe a little bit there. Let's look here. I mean, not a ton, right? This is really good news. Here, not a ton. And again, not a ton. So that's fantastic, actually. One thing I have noticed while we're doing that is the shapes of the stars in all the four corners are relatively similar as well. They're all slightly triangular, a little bit elongated, but none of them are sort of divergent. They're all kind of keeping the same shape, which is good news because that means we have a fairly symmetrical frame across the whole field of view here. And that's actually what you want from a macro lens. Macro lenses are known for being what's called flat field. So before, when I was talking about field curvature, where you would get maybe focus in the middle and defocus towards the edges, macro lenses tend not to suffer from that. They also tend to be lower distortion and ideally have less astigmatism and other aberrations. And here that definitely appears to be the case. Like, when viewed from a normal viewing distance, which I always remind people, like here we're zoomed in at 400% with a 60 megapixel sensor. To be honest, who cares how things look zoomed in like this? This is not how people experience photography. People experience photography like this. And in this case, yeah, it's actually not too bad. What I watch out for are the stars relatively even in size across the frame. When you've got a lot of bad astigmatism, it can actually make stars around the edges look a lot bigger. So it sort of creates this sense of movement, which can be cool, but isn't always appropriate. And in this case, yeah, it's nice and flat. Pretty good, pretty good. I do want to mention these 4 samples will be available for download. Just check the description for a link. It'll bring you back to Fervent Astronomy's website where you can snag these files, full res RAWs, and then you can download them, pixel peep, adjust them as you see fit, and see if this is a lens worthy of finding a way into your camera kit. But as always, I put a lot of work into this. These are my copyrighted files, so please don't distribute them online or anywhere else. Please don't misrepresent them as your own, et cetera, et cetera. But for helping you assess the lens, they are there for you to download. So we'll just flip through here. This is 2.8, 3.2, 3.5, and f4. And obviously we're losing a fair amount of exposure, and I'm not detecting too much of an improvement in the vignetting. I think that's probably going to be best solved by actual lens corrections. Looking in the center here again, f2.8, f3.2. This is odd. You'll notice that f3.2, we've lost the tines on the star here. Interesting. f3.5 and f4. And, well, that is peculiar. Let's go look at some brighter stars. Maybe this one. We've got some nice tines on here. It's quite bright. So f2.8, f3.2, okay. f3.5, resolved the tines. f4, and they're pretty much gone. So this is interesting. We're getting less diffraction the more we stop down. Let's find another one. 2.8, 3.2, 3.5, f4. Well, that is just peculiar. That's opposite of what I would expect, to be honest. Huh. Well, it is what it is. So let's see what happens in the corners when we stop down. So here we are at f2.8, 3.2, 3.5, and f4. And here things are getting kind of dark in the corners, kind of underexposed. We are getting things that look a little bit more elongated now. They've lost that triangular shape because I believe the triangular shape was probably coming from that sagittal astigmatism. So in my experience, one astigmatism might resolve more or less as you stop down. In this case, it's the sagittal. Here we can see there's a little bit of a blue edge on this side and a little bit of a red edge. So that is a little bit of that chromatic aberration, but it's happening way out here in the corner of the frame where it's really not that huge of an issue. So that's, altogether, not too bad. That's 3.2, 2.8. Yeah. And of course, when we look around the frame here, everything appears to be in focus, so I don't see any field curvature. Let's see if there are some distortions. Let's go to the develop module. We're going to check out the lens corrections. First of all, we have the remove chromatic aberration. And let's just for kicks come here and see nothing happens. Nothing happens really. You can, if you're a stickler, come in here with the defringe tool and select some of that bluey purple, and it should get rid of it. Although this can lead to some issues. I'm just going to crank the amount. And you see what's happened is there's squares of different colors basically plopped all over some of the brighter stars here. This is how Lightroom actually deals with this problem, is it just kind of puts a patch of resolving color on there, and it evens everything out in the wash. But what can happen is if you do it too much, you get this checkerboard. In this case, even at the value of 6 there, I can see there's still some happening, and even I think it's had it set us at 3. At 3, I can see it starting to kind of go past the borders of the stars. But that being said, we don't even need any of that because I don't really think that's a big of an issue there. All right, so enable profile corrections, and we can see 2 things happen. One, the vignetting resolves quite a bit. I'll just flip that on and off a couple of times. It can help to look at the navigator there. You can see the difference. Pretty happy with that, to be honest. And the other thing that we can see is that this lens has some pin cushion distortion. So when we click this profile corrections, it's referencing the corrections that Sigma sends Adobe's way. And in this case, what's happening is applying a transformation. It's essentially stretching the lenses. It's essentially stretching the image out from the center in a certain way, in a certain amount. So you can see right around the corners, not a lot changed. Those stars don't really move. And up here at the long edge, you can see there's something happening there. These stars are going to leave the frame, or at least some of them. And you can look on the short edge here and here, and I don't think there's a whole ton of transformation happening there. So you're not really going too far off the field of view of this lens. Some of the long edge here is kind of getting cropped out of the frame, and essentially this middle portion, which you can imagine if it was kind of pushed away from you a little bit, when we put the corrections on, the way the geometry gets transformed, it kind of gets flattened, almost as if it's coming towards the viewer a little bit. And by doing that, it puts it into the same plane. So you can imagine if this were a brick wall, you might, where you would expect straight lines across, they might curve slightly in towards the center of the frame. Kind of, I'm exaggerating, but kind of like that. And then when we enable that correction, it will pull those lines up and flatten them. And we kind of lose a little resolution here because it's doing a little bit of interpolation, but we have 60 megapixels. It's not a huge deal. It's definitely not going to cause any issues. Overall, yeah, this is pretty solid, I would say. It's not zero distortion, of course, but it is otherwise pretty good from what I've seen. And it just has that odd diffractions wide open. That's very strange. Or I shouldn't say strange, I should say uncommon. But altogether, that should give you an idea of how this lens performs. I would say it's probably going to perform pretty decently. And you do have options with E-mount. With E-mount, you always have options. So there are some other lenses that you might want to compare to this, including the Sony 90mm macro, which came out a few years back, and maybe something like an adapted lens, like a Canon macro. So I will see if I can get some reviews of those up as well. They might already be up, I don't know. And I'll definitely try and do a head-to-head with those lenses to kind of get a feel for what might be your best choice if you're looking for a lens like this from one of the major brands. All right, well, that's a wrap. I hope you found those samples interesting. Overall, you know what? I can see myself using this lens. At F2.8, and we're going to be tracking anyway. It's 105 millimeter focal length, so the 2.8 doesn't really bother me. Ultimately, macro, not bad for astrophotography. Not bad across the sky there. So that's my opinion. But the purpose of doing these reviews is to give you the tools, dear viewer, that you need to decide if this particular lens is the lens for you. So I hope that this video has done so, essentially. I hope you've enjoyed it or found it useful. And as always, I'm Darren. This has been Fervent Astronomy. Thanks so much, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one. I feel kind of like I'm holding a tumbler or something like that. This would be a good lens mug if anyone made Sigma lens mugs, or if anyone made lens mugs anymore. Do people still do that? I don't know.